what you do, Paul, as an activist,
Yes.
as a writer,
Yes.
as a man of high profile. We use these profiles. Archie Roach taught me that. Use your profile, Jack,
Yeah, good.
for the betterment of others, for the edification of others.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the first event of the 2021 Brimbank Writers and Readers Festival. My name is Councillor Ranka Rasik and I'm the Mayor of Brimbank City Council. I would like to acknowledge my fellow Brimbank councillors, tonight guest speakers, Aboriginal Elder Uncle Jake Charles and journalist Paul Bateman, our festival principal sponsor, Victoria University Polytechnic, everyone else joining this broadcast tonight. On behalf of the Brimbank City Council, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. It is my great pleasure to open this year's Writers and Readers Festival. Our festival celebrates a love of writing, reading, literature, language diversity and creativity. This is the 16th year of the festival. I would like to thank the principal sponsor, Victoria University Polytechnic, for helping to make this festival possible. We have many fantastic events coming up over the next 10 days, so please join us for more. I am now going to hand you over to writer and journalist Paul Bateman for the In Conversation with Uncle Jake Charles.
Well, good evening everyone and welcome to the opening night of the 2021 Brimbank Writers and Readers Festival. My name is Paul Bateman and I'm honoured and delighted to be joined in conversation tonight by the legendary Uncle Jack Charles. Jack, welcome.
Thanks very much, Paul. Good to be here.
I'd like to thank the Mayor for her introduction, and I'd like to acknowledge too that we're gathered tonight on the lands of the First Peoples and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And Jack, since you're here, it seems too good an opportunity to pass up to invite you perhaps to offer a welcome to country.
Yes, to do a Wominjeka, welcome to country. I am proud to be on the lands of the Wurundjeri with this Writers' Festival. I'm very thankful for the Victorian University Polytechnic mob for allowing this festival to be here on the Wurundjeri land, and I pay my respects to my greats from the past, those that are present, and those especially that are emerging.
Thanks, Jack. Tonight, Jack and I will be in conversation for about 45 minutes, and we hope to take at least 20 minutes of your questions at the end of our conversation. If you'd like to ask a question, use the chat function on the YouTube interface. Just put in your name and a succinct question, and staff from Brimbank will collate those questions while Jack and I are talking and send them through to me by text. Of course, tonight's event was to have been in front of a live audience, so taking questions would have been simple. This presents a bit of a technical challenge, but I foresee no problems whatsoever. We also have two books to give away tonight, two copies of Uncle Jack's 2020 memoir, Born Again Blackfella. If you'd like to be in the running to win a copy, just in the chat function again, put your name and your suburb and hit enter, and staff from Brimbank will select the two winners and announce the winners towards the end of the proceedings in the chat function as well. So books and questions, use the chat function, name, suburb, and away we go. That's all the housekeeping. Let me, by way of a quick introduction to Uncle Jack, tell you that Uncle Jack has worn many hats throughout his long and lustrous life. He has been an actor, a burglar, a musician, a heroin addict, an activist, even Senior Victorian Australian of the Year in 2016. But the title he's most proud to claim is that of Aboriginal Elder. His story is an Australian epic, beautifully captured in his 2020 memoir, Born Again Blackfella. The book was shortlisted by the Australian Book Industry Awards and named 2020 Biography Book of the Year. It's told with incredible warmth and candour, and it also details Jack's experience as part of the Stolen Generations. There are laugh out loud moments in the book, and there are moments too of utter desolation and despair. The thing I loved most about the book is the voice, Jack's voice, which is always warm, candid, welcoming, and authentic. The challenge tonight will be to cover Jack's extraordinary life in a mere 45 minutes, when the story barely fits within the 225 pages of the book. But Jack, we'll give it our best shot. I hope to talk to you about your childhood and adolescence, about your experiences on stage and screen, a chapter we might call Crime and Punishment, and then we'll finish, as you do in the book, with the never-ending story, as you call it, towards healing and reconciliation. But ahead of that, my first question to you is very much set in the here and now. The opening lines to the final chapter of the book are, "These days I know who I am." Uncle Jack, who is that? Who is the man before us now, and how are you travelling these days?
I am travelling very well indeed, Paul, and I can tell you definitely I now know who I am. Been given the benefit of having such a high profile. I've been one of those lucky enough to be plucked by that mob doing the Who Do You Think You Are series.
On SBS?
On SBS.
Yes.
And it's coming on as a special for NAIDOC week.
And any surprises? I know you can't disclose the detail, but
there are surprises.
There are surprises.
I never knew, but it has firmly stamped me as a member of the Stolen Generations, one of those few who gets to discover my heritage, that lost, hidden, denied heritage. I was taken under the under the assimilation policy of the 40s, and I wasn't allowed to be an Aboriginal, although I looked Aboriginal, even as a child, as a baby. So I now know who I am. I'm blessed that I've received this information over a 2-week period of filming here in Victoria, and then filming over in Tasmania to discover the heritage reaching back 4 generations of my greats.
And Jack, what does it mean to be an uncle, and what does it mean to you to be an uncle?
I think uncle is definitely a term of respect given unto people like myself, Uncle Archie Roach, people like that. There's so many of us aunties and uncles that have worked tirelessly in the community for many years, and we work towards making life better and easier for those that are the stragglers that struggle, I like to say. Those that are locked up in our youth detention centres and our adult prisons. Archie and I were aiming to do something better for them. Those young ones that are reaching out in the music field. So Archie, with his foundation, the Archie Roach Foundation, likes to give them a chop out too at the awards and etc. So this is what you do as an uncle. As you earn that titled respect by the work that you put in back into community.
Well, it was a long road to gaining that respect. I want to go right back to the beginning and to the almost 2-decade journey from the time when you're taken from your mother, Blanchie Charles, in 1943 at the age of just 4 months, right through to almost 2 decades later when you reconnect with your mother. It's a journey that involves you being at the Salvation Army Box Hill Boys Home for nearly a decade or more than a decade, and with a foster family in Blackburn for 3 years. Can you take us back to the beginning of that journey and tell us a little bit about your mother in particular?
I was placed in that home as a baby. There's a baby section, and so I was raised there, little realising that I knew anything. I knew nothing about my Aboriginality. I was just one of the kids, and and nobody ever jumped my bones until I reached, 15, 13, 12, 15. Then some kids would call me blackfella and avo and things like that, and caused me some angst and anxiety, and it caused me to throw my fist around a little bit and chase fellas around, but I knew nothing of my Aboriginality. But there didn't seem to be any real, what we would call racism in that home. We were all, I was lumped in as the only registered Aboriginal kid in that home until I was, until 78. Until 1948.
So did you have any sense of your Aboriginality in those formative years of your life?
None whatsoever.
No.
I never knew anything about it except that I'd be goaded by some of the fellas about Captain Cook being killed by the black fellas, and I was pushed around because of that.
And you were only 2 years old when you entered the home.
Yes.
So are they your first memories? Your earliest memories would have been as a child at the Box Hill Boys' Home?
Not until I reached about 5 or 6 did I start remembering things about what it was like living.
That home had a good reputation at the time. In subsequent decades, darker truths would emerge from there.
Yes.
But it was a place of both great positives and terrible negatives for you.
Run by the Salvation Army.
Yes.
And that it was a struggle for us young kids, little kids, in their baby's home until you reach 3 or 4, sleeping on a veranda, being scared by the poplar trees. They all seem to be like you, moving and swaying and very scary, and so you would wee the bed and that, and you were put on punishment for that. So for a long time, until I was about 9, I was wetting the bed, and it was always harsh and cruel punishment.
The school seemed to excel in abuse and humiliation and beatings, and I was very nervous about asking you some questions about that, but you say in the book that you found it over the years cathartic to talk about those experiences and to write about those experiences, and you encourage others to do the same. How did you arrive at that place of relative peace and equanimity?
There were some good moments, even in the harshest moments. Like when you were naughty, you were made to put on a pair of boxing gloves that was bigger than you, and really tied tightly around your wrist. And I was, a skinny little kid and that, but you were locked into the gym with a bigger fella, and his job was to bash you, and you had to come out crying and that. But there were 2, but one in particular that said, "Jack," and he did it twice. He said, "I'm not going to hit you. I don't want to hit you, Jack. You're my mate," and that. So I remember his name, and I won't say it here, but I remember his name. And these are the good aspects of something that's really devastating, cruel and callous punishment. The Salvation Army, like giving evidence at the Royal Commission into Childhood Abuses and etc. I had totally forgotten some of the punishments that I'd endured.
Yes.
And so many of my fellow survivors from that home, all white kids, had remembered some of the punishments and gave it to Ryan, Carlisle and Thomas, and they gave me a heads up on some of the punishments that I'd endured. You forget some of the punishments, and they were so cruel and callous and that, but that was one aspect that I really enjoyed, and I was able to pass on that message as a kind of a heads up on how resilient we kids were
Yes.
in that home against the odds.
It sounded like you almost normalised it. You said in the book it was like a war zone in some ways. You become immune to the violence. But it was devastating to read that the traumatic cyclical nature of that violence meant that some of the abused boys became perpetrators of abuse themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Tell
that's
us.
part of that part of the process, and that I was the cleaner of the school after
Yes.
hours. My job was to clean the schools too,
Yeah.
and that so. And there was a bigger kid there that abused me there, and etc. But I was always grateful that these times never lasted long,
Yes.
and as I said, we are resilient.
You
You
were
never forget it, but you try and keep your distance. And most of the time, especially on weekends, I'd shimmy up a big pine tree and stay up there most of the days on Saturdays and Sunday when I got spare time behind the school.
Yes.
And so I kept away from the maddening crowds and etc. that way.
And you were quite the gardener too, it
I was
appears
a
in the
good
book.
gardener growing chrysanthemums.
And
that.
winning awards for those
Yes,
chrysanthemums
yes.
as well.
Yeah, the
Remarkable.
geography and arithmetic was too hard for me, so out in the yard and into the garden.
You were 14 when you left the home, but even on the last day there was time for one last humiliation from the school. You were
Yes,
given a beating on your last day,
The
is
last
that right?
6 are the best
What happened
for
there?
some minor indiscretion.
A farewell present.
Yes, some minor indiscretion, and they had to have the last word and that, and so I do remember writing about this with Romeril, writing in for Jack Charles versus the Crown, that tears blur my vision as I walked out of the home after being given 6 of the best by Major O'Brien for some minor indiscretion.
And-
Walking with my suitcase, saying goodbye to the large, big water tower strong, the place where we belonged, and all that, and on my way to walk down to the Box Hill station to take myself up to Mrs. Murphy's place
And
in Blackburn.
Despite all the hardships of the school, presumably you felt ambivalent about leaving the only home you'd actually known.
Yeah.
Or were you glad to get out of there?
I missed it. And I remember that Mrs. Murphy had some two twin bodgy sons.
And let's just explain who Mrs. Murphy
Mrs.
is.
Murphy
When you
was
left
my
the school
foster
at
mum.
14, yes, you went.
She worked at the cottage factory up there in Blackburn.
And how did you come to be
Well, her
with
daughter,
her?
Norman Nichols, used to come in and take me out. Her and her husband, Kevin, would come in their Austin A7 and pick me up on a Friday and take me into town first, past the skipping girl in Richmond. There's a skipping girl, Jack. It was regular. They'd take me out on weekends.
and you called Mrs. Murphy Mum?
Yes.
Yeah.
Eventually I called her Mum.
Yes,
And that because, she was very fond of me and I was fond of her.
yes.
As a little kid, and that, and then we got used to. She wasn't the only person that would take me out on the weekend. Many of us in the home that were considered as orphans were taken out by other prospective foster mums and fathers or adopted mums and fathers. And so I remember going to 3 other different places. One over in Elphington, Mrs. Green. I loved her and her 2 kids too. And an old couple over in Footscray who introduced me to Ted Whitten. I remember these things. And that's why I still barrack for Footscray nowadays.
Good
because I
man.
met Teddy Whitten.
Good man. This is a festival being held out west, so that'll win you a lot of votes online. While you're living with Mrs. Murphy in Blackburn, you got your first job too at a glassworks,
Yep.
and was introduced to a really lovely boss and a man who seemed something of a mentor and a carer.
He was a lovely bloke,
Yeah,
Alf.
a man called
Alf Clark.
a man called Alf. What did having a job and
I was
day-to-day
doing,
responsibilities
making
mean
mirrors,
for you?
helping making mirrors, but also glass beveling.
Yes.
doing the bevel of glasses. That was the trade.
And you were good at it?
I was very good at it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I used
Yes.
to stay overtime, as a matter of fact. And I would sing a lot because there's some of the contraptions that I used to work with the glass going over these wheels with water dripping onto them on a pulley belt would set up an awful scream. So I used to sing, the top of my voice in harmony, counter harmony to these screams that were coming from these 4 panes of glasses that were going over these rollers, stone rollers, and that rounding them and that, they were going over grooves in the stone and that, So I think that's where I got my powerful voice from and my love for singing.
And while you were working at the Glassworks, was it your workmates who encouraged you to look into your Aboriginal heritage?
They knew that I wasn't. I'd always known, even before leaving the home,
Yes.
that I wasn't an orphan.
And so they pointed out to you that there were communities of Aboriginal people in Fitzroy,
in Collingwood, Jack. And the words were, "I'll bet you got family amongst them, Jack. You go see for yourself."
And you did, and
So
in
one
fact,
Thursday night with a full
there
pay
was.
packet that I normally have to hand over to Mum, Mrs. Murphy, on a Thursday night, I headed over to Gertrude Street, Napier Gertrude Street, and as soon as I jumped off that tram, an old bloke pulled me up, and he yelled at me, and he said, "Charles, you Blanchy Charles's boys." These was my memories, things that I recall in the Box Hill Boys' Home. This was one of the most significant moments in my life because, I'd already known that I wasn't an orphan.
Yes.
I'd met an uncle and an auntie, Auntie Amy Charles and a Henry Charles, in the home, who said that they were my auntie and uncle, so
Yes.
I knew I wasn't. And I also, just before leaving the home, I'd met a young fella who had the same name, Charles, and I said to him, he could be my brother. So going into Collingwood Fitzroy, this old fella drags me into the Builder's Arms over there in Gertrude Street. And of course I've entered another world. Every face in the place seemed black. Anyone who could, they rush up and introduce themselves to me as an uncle and auntie. And I'm so overwhelmed by these people's beery hugs and kisses. I didn't drink myself, but I ripped open my pay packet, shouted a few beers, quite a few beers, and I had a lemon squash myself. And then one old lady croaked, "Your mum, young Jack, she living up at Swan Hill. You should go and see her."
Gee.
The penny dropped right then. So I get home late that night to Mrs. Murphy. "Joy, oh joy, Mum, I just found Mum." I expected her to share my joy, but no such luck. She wrangles the story out of me, my night in a Fitzroy pub, being recognised as a Charles, but worse still, that pay packet ripped open and a third of it spent. This riles her no end. We argued. I raised my hand, and she yells out, "Get to bed," she hisses, before backing off. And no sooner had I put on my pyjamas and settled down for the night, when she calls me to the front door. A police divvy wagon's parked in the drive, and I'm driven over to Royal Park Home for Juvenile Offenders. I forgot. I didn't know. I was the ward of the state, a child of the Crown, and would have been until I'm 18, and that woman I'd called Mum and deemed me unruly, disobedient. So for the first time locked alone in a cell, I do remember crying myself to sleep.
And in fact, you write at the end of that story in the book, "That night I stopped believing in God."
Amen.
It is a remarkable story that the night you find where your actual mother might be.
All my Christian sensibilities were somewhat blackened.
Absolutely.
It's a nice line, isn't it?
Gee.
I like it anyway.
So you spent, I think, a fortnight at Tirana before Alf at the Glassworks, your boss, kindly bailed you out and brought you back to the Glassworks. But the idea was planted that you should find your mother, and eventually you do make it up
Well,
to
I was
Swan
writing
Hill.
once I was there. He put me in a gentleman's residence in Glenferrie.
Yep.
And I would write letters to the Swan Hill police station, the sergeant. And he knew who my mum was.
And he
so
said,
I'd
"Come
write
up."
letters to her
Yeah.
through the sergeant and that, And then that year, that very same year, I said to him, listen, I intend to come up there on my Christmas break, my 3-week Christmas break, and meet my mum. And when Alf Clark got to hear about this, he says, oh, Jack, I'll fly you up. So he paid for the flight up and gave me extra money to go up there.
And you met your mother, and
And
how
I
would you
met Mama.
characterise that time you spent with her?
It was unusual, strange. It's not like meeting a sister or a brother that you hadn't known, that you met on a tram or something like this. This was something different, you know. She was held herself back somewhat. Got to remember, I was the firstborn.
Yes, first of 11.
First of 13.
13? Gee,
13
sorry.
of us, so 2 died at birth.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, in the missions in those days, people were having a baker's dozens of kids. And that I recently found through this SBS mob that my father had 13 kids to different women too.
Gee.
So that's I find
Yeah.
that strange that people in the missions were having a baker's dozens of kids. We were breeding. We were these missions were intended to be set up as our last, you know, as death camps, etc.
The impression you leave in the book is that meeting your mother was rewarding, and you're very glad that it happened, but that she was still understandably carrying a lot of pain and confusion.
Which I didn't know. I hadn't known.
Which made a warm reconciliation much harder.
Well, it made it easier when the sergeant of the SWAT Police, you know, picked me up from the airport and plopped me at the back of the Federal Hotel there, within sight of the blackfella camp. These wooden huts and that, they look like plantation huts from the slave days and that, you know. Really opened my eyes. But he said, Jack, you're playing the prodigal son, Jack. You'd get a better reception if you're from your mother, if you bought her a carton of Melbourne Bitter. Your mum likes to drink, Jack. So I did. I bought her a carton of Melbourne Bitter and that. And that's what got me, because I wasn't a drinker in those days. I wasn't drinking. And that, when I did get back from that visit, I did start to drink.
Yes.
And that, you know, because I was knocking around with the jazz clubs and etc., trad jazz and etc., night chambers and trad jazz, you know, Denise, I mean, Judith Durham, as a young girl, as a singer in a jazz band, I used to knock around with that mob. And
When you came back from seeing your mother, you stayed at a hostel in South Melbourne, and some people from the new theatre company came around looking for volunteers to join the acting troupe, and you signed up.
Yep.
And it was the beginning of a 7-year
It was
love
the Gladys
affair.
Nichols Hostel in Cunningham Street, Northcote, actually,
Fantastic.
Westgarth. And I was the one that raised my hand and said, yeah, I'd like to do that.
And,
And
you've written that when you were
acting by night, glass beveling by day, I was learning a new trade at night.
great.
That.
You wrote that when you're pushed out on stage, you feel like you're born for the first time.
Oh yes.
Describe what you
Another
mean by that
character
and how that
you
felt.
know, I really, you know, liked performing for an audience. You get to hear their oohs and ahs and that, you know, you feel their eyes boring into you. You feel their presence. You can hear them breathing. You can hear them not breathing, etc. So I'd say we were doing a lot of political reviews. It was the new theatre, comedy called the Pink Theatre. You know, like many other blackfellas, you know, the communist people would latch onto us and make something of us. But those of us that didn't know much about our indigeneity, our aboriginality, and nothing about it, and that didn't fall for the gag. Yeah, there would never be a red under my bed and etc. I didn't know anything about communism, etc. But this mob allowed me to gain a foothold and learn how to be an actor, how to walk on stage, talk on stage, recall lines, and etc.
It sounds like your political
Developing
conscious.
personalities was like as an actor.
incidentally, you say you played every type of character except an Aboriginal person.
Except an Aboriginal.
Yes, wow.
Yes.
Your political consciousness seems to have come, correct me if I'm wrong, when you joined with Bob Mazza to form Australia's first Aboriginal theatre company. Do you remember much about the formation of that theatre company and why it was so important in connecting you to your own Aboriginality?
I think it was the time when the pram factory were about to kick off in Carlton there. And so people from the mama give us a chop out. My partner, Jack Houston, wrote some of the sketches. John Smythe, a local person, also from the pram, also wrote sketches for this. Jack Charles was up and fighting, for want of a name, that's what we called it.
Yes.
You know, but the first actual production that we did do was Brimbank, because there was nothing for us to perform. So as the Nindathana Theatre developed from a production called Brimbank, and we even employed actors from Bellbird in it. Got to remember that Bob was the first Aboriginal person to be blind cast in the black and white series of Bellbird, all right? And I was the second person to be blind cast in Bellbird in their first coloured episode. So we were the first that the ABC plucked to perform as actors. And once the theatre people noted this, Melbourne Theatre Company picked me up to do some readings of new plays and etc. in the days when Frank Freen and Fred Parslow were holding court at the Melbourne Theatre Company and etc. So they had to have a rethink. From that moment on, theatre people in the theatre or acting on stage playing Aboriginal, couldn't have any white people doing that anymore. Because we had two professional actors,
Yes.
Two Aboriginal people claiming to be professional actors.
During your theatre career, you were drinking quite heavily, but famously gave that up one night after being told of some appalling behaviour.
Appalling behaviour.
While you were drunk, and you were so shocked by this.
So shocked, knifing the four tyres of a mate's
His car. Yes.
A Morgan.
But
His
is it-
sports job.
but is it
and
the-
it shocked me so much that I could have stabbed him rather than his tyres.
And you had no memory of this.
I had no memory of it. He
Wow.
had to remind me. But from the time he told me, I gave up drinking for 8 years.
But is that round about the same time that you started taking heroin
Yeah,
seriously?
well, once I'd given up the giggle juice, heroin was really rife in the pram factory in those days.
Yes.
So I got into heroin. Out of the fry pan into the fire.
In the book, you say that taking heroin involved a routine that is tiresome and compelling, with the repetitiveness draining at every turn on my soul.
Yes.
It seems to have deeply become a part of who you were, and not a part that you liked, a part you were slave to.
Yes. I was enslaved too, and for many years, people who employed me in theatres, in film, etc., television, all knew that they were employing somebody, as I would like to say, with a raging brer rabbit, a raging drug habit.
Was there?
They allowed me these foibles because I had produced anyway.
Yes.
And that, once I signed that contract, and I did say to them, Neil Armfield, people from Sydney Theatre Company, from Black Swan Theatre, Janet Holmes of Court, I'd tell them that I got a rating, I got a habit, and that, so I paid a little bit extra to support my habit as long as I produced, and etc. So, but in these days now, I like to, talk to young people in the going through VCA or through WAP or a QPAC up there in Brisbane, of the pitfalls that we have risk assessments now in the industry. You can't get away with being a self-centred, demon, possessed by an addiction. because the rest of the cast aren't addicted. And you know, and they don't like working with somebody who might not be punctual.
You seem to be a relatively highly functioning heroin addict, I must say.
Well, I was. Many of us in the pram factory were highly functional.
But it did mean you had to start your burglary career through the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, a process which you jokingly describe
ironically, on Bundurong country.
On Bundurong, which, so therefore you describe as collecting rent. But talk us through what was going through your mind when you begin breaking into people's houses at night over many years, and sometimes the same house again and again.
Oh yeah, 11 times at 12 Montalto Avenue in Toorak.
Is it a terrifying experience, the nerves that come with that?
No, it wasn't, because you're armed up, you know, all senses of propriety would dissipate once you'd had a hit. You'd do anything during that period of time while it's working, etc.
And you got caught one night hiding in a
house
cupboard. Tell that
Kew
story.
One time, and this fella grabbed me. He saw me with me torch in my mouth. It was a Californian bungalow. It's not there now, as a matter of fact, because ABL and I went up there to see if we can include this man's story of busting me in his house, and that for bastarding the doco. It's not there now. But he had caught me, and he caught me my torch was in my mouth. I was rifling through the bedroom drawers next door to the bed, and the car's headlights shone into the bedroom, and he stopped the car, jammed on the brakes, and I freaked out. All I had time was to duck into the wardrobe, and he came in real quick, and he said, "Come out, I know you're in there." And he said, "I'm armed, so come on out, you know." So I opened the wardrobe door, and he dropped his brolly, which was his choice of weapon at the time. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm sorry, mate. Look, I'm robbing you." I said, "Well, what are you taking?" I said, "Nothing, I just got started." I said, "Empty out your pockets." And she's finished parking the Rover between the other two cars in the back, and she comes down through the kitchen where I came in from, you know. And she said, "Have you got him, love? Have you got him?" And she said, "Yeah, I got him. He's in there. Call the police." "No, I want to see him." "No, call the police." "No, I want to see him first." So she comes into the bedroom. She takes one look and, aghast, she said, "You're Jack Charles." I got a shock. We all got a shock.
How did she know you?
She knew me by seeing me at probably performing Bastardy, the documentary, the play, not the documentary, the play.
Yes.
Bastardy, or Dembula. She was a regular at the pram factory. So they were shocked. They said, "Oh, Jack, better come down to the kitchen and have a cup of tea and we'll talk this over." That's what we did.
Wow.
And they let us go. They didn't call the police. Well, look, we're not going to call the police, Jack, you know, but we don't care what you do with the other houses in the street here. I didn't have the heart to say that I'd already done most of the other houses in the street anyway, and that, you know, so I always found it comfortable in Kew. It was in the days when security was lax. They didn't have security. There were no sensor lights as there are now.
Yes. You do say in the book that on reflection, when you think about those burgs, you're aware you violated people's sense of safety.
Oh, yes.
That, I thought, was a candid admission on reflection.
Yeah, well, for a long time, I stopped going up the stairs into the bedrooms.
Yeah.
And so I would only be comfortable going downstairs.
It's also fair to say you weren't a super successful burglar.
No, busted 22 times.
Busted 22 times?
How could I be successful?
Yes, which necessitated several visits to jail. And interestingly, in the book you say that prison represents a significant binary in my life, both the damage done and yet a place of strength and empowerment. Oh, yeah. How is prison a place of strength and empowerment?
I furthered my education in jail. I always gravitated towards the classification mob says, in those days you could pick whatever jail you liked. Which jail would you like to go to, Jack, to do your time? Well,
And you saw
what
most
about
of them.
back to Castlemaine Jail? You
Yes.
know, I just started a pottery shop up there, the last jail sentence, so I continued my pottery up there. And that said, okay, Jack, go ahead. And that's so. I preferred small prisons, wall prisons, Beechworth, Bendigo, Castlemaine. These were my three favourite jails. You
Just-
can have favourites, and Castlemaine was my favourite because I learnt the fine art of ceramica there. I became Victoria's hotshot potter, teaching ceramica in prison, getting my qualifications in prison as a Year 12 teacher, up to Year 12.
You did more than that. That course, you say in the book, you offered it 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Yeah, down in an open camp down Gippsland Way, I could do that, not
Yes.
in the wall prison.
Oh, okay. But even so, the prison staff trusted you implicitly with, tools.
I
and
had the key to the unit, the
yeah.
education unit.
And you say that it had a deeper function of providing a safe space for other prisoners.
Sanctuary.
Yes,
It was a place of sanctuary.
yes.
You could come into there. I call my pottery shops in jail Psycho Ceramica because you had to be a crackpot to be in the nick in the first place.
Just quickly tell the story though, which I laughed out loud at. When you were in Bendigo prison and you were unwell, you were sent to a hospital outside the prison for some
Yes.
checkups.
Yes.
And at the end of that prison visit, no one from the end of that hospital visit, no one from the prison came to pick you up. So
No.
what happened next?
So the nurse said, Jack, look, it's almost 6 o'clock. You know where the jail is, Jack, don't you? I said, yeah, it's just up the hill there. This is through the town. I said, well, look, Jack, you just go up, okay? Here's your greens, put your greens on. So
And
there I
just
was
walk back to the
walking
prison
through-
yourself.
And people were offering me cigarettes, things like this, saying hello to me.
And what happened when you got back to the
Well, I was
prison?
knocking on, banging on the let me in, let me in. What are you doing? What are you? Oh. So somebody was hauled over the hot coals over that. Officer Brown was.
Not often you hear a story about a prisoner knocking on the door from the outside asking
Trying
to be
to
let
get
back
back
in.
in.
That's brilliant. These theatre experiences and these jail experiences, your drug experiences, a lot of this story was captured brilliantly by Emil Corton Wilson in the 2008 documentary Bastardy, where Emil followed you around for 7 years to produce a documentary that was the official selection at film festivals around the world and premiered in 2008 in Melbourne to great success. What on earth was it like having a documentary maker follow you around, not for 7 days, but for 7 years?
Off and on for 7 years. I did 2 one-year jail sentences in between.
Okay.
Emil would come and visit me and bring me in books and top up my account.
Yep.
And etc. So I was well looked after. But as soon as I got out, I would do something.
Yes.
In the old, when we first started, he wouldn't have got a shot out of me unless I conned $50 from him. And so I'd.
What was the
'cause
50
He knew I had a
the 50
drug
bucks?
habit,
For the habit, yep.
and I'd go into Collingwood Fitzroy up onto the 12th floor and Napier Street, and I'd get a shot up the Warwick Farm, up the arm, and I'd come back for that day's filming. Always followed through.
And
I always followed through, like with Janet Holmes of Court and with Sydney Theatre Company. All these people, I had said, I signed the contract, I'm yours, but you must know, I have a drug habit. And that, so I followed through, I am yours. So I followed through, and eventually, at the end of 2008, I'd come out of jail 2006. We needed 2 years to finish off the documentary. 2 years for me to jump off the methadone and to be a key player, start to be a key player as my community's self-proclaimed featherfoot Kadacha man, lawman. Of course, you have to be totally up yourself in order to undertake such an extraordinary role. The ultimate role that I've ever done is to play that kind of elder statesman if people are going to be calling me the uncle, Uncle Jack, I have to live up to that standard. I have to be understanding of the people I'm talking to, that they're afflicted by a raging brer rabbit, by a drug habit, and etc. I'm not, so I can understand even what they're going to say, etc. I can read these fellas, read these girls, read these men and women, the difficulties, because I've been in the same boat in the past. But I have a clearer mind now because I'm not on drugs. Yet I'm there in community, and that was the basic of forming my ability to be an elder statesman, to be a proper uncle to the community.
You've said elsewhere that Bastardy was the project that saved your life.
It was.
Yes.
It indeed, I call Emil Gordon Wilson my saviour.
And was part of that you were so astonished and a little bit perhaps embarrassed by the portrayal of your drug habit? It shocked you sufficiently that you gave up heroin.
Yeah.
That's the story?
Yes, yeah.
And how did you do that?
I don't regret it. I can't regret. You can't go living a life full of regrets.
No.
And that, you know.
But it's an astonishing moment nonetheless
Yeah,
to see yourself not like what you see
if
and to
anything,
change.
the one main regret I have, and it was prompted by something that Rachel Mazza had told me some years ago. He said, yes, you should regret having been stolen at 2 months, at 4 months, Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's regrettable.
Did Bastardy lead to, or was one of the key influences behind the stage play Uncle Jack Charles versus the Crown?
We wanted to embellish more stories of what went on in the Box Hill Boys' home. Strange and wonderful ways how the Christian mob, the Salvation Army mob, would work on whitewashing me.
So you took your story, put it on stage,
And
travelled the world with it?
And the fact that once I had jumped off the drugs, I had this clarity of mind that I ever forgot that I ever possessed, and that I recall some wonderful strange moments by, for instance, being a 9-year-old kid being trained to sing a special song at a special event at the exhibition buildings at a big Salvation Army Congress there. And there I was to sing a song after handing some posies to those in braid on the stage. I had to sing this song that I was specially trained to sing. And the last line of that chorus in that song said, "Everybody lived in gladness, all because the white man came." It blew the audience away when I sang it, because in Jack Charles versus the Crown, I had a 3-piece band, so there was music involved in that show, and I would break out into song every now and then. Some of the songs that I recall from my time of being whitewashed in the blood of the Lamb of Jesus Christ at the Box Hill Boys' Home.
Was it a surprise to you that you were nominated and ultimately won Senior Victorian Australian of the Year?
I understood that.
Yes.
Because we'd already toured Victoria with Jack Charles versus the Crown, gone around Australia with Jack Charles versus the Crown. We'd already gone overseas to the mother country with Jack Charles versus the Crown.
Yes.
And that, along with Bastardy, because at some of these theatres, Rachel recommended it'd be a good idea if we showed Bastardy, the doco, along at the same venue. Some of these theatres have, some of these theatre complexes have a couple of theatres, so you'd show Bastardy, the doco, while I would be performing Jack Charles versus the Crown, so people could see me at my weakest moments against the pulling power of the white powders at the time of Bastardy. And then they see me with a clarity of mind telling my story on my own, with 3 band members and the pottery wheel on stage.
Yes.
It's a beautiful piece of theatre craftsmanship, this was. And I love getting up and talking to the audience and telling more stories of how it was to be raised as a black fella by the Salvation Army, whitewashed and etc. All traces of my indigeneity were supposed to disappear, but they never ever could do that. And then the third act, where the audience become the High Court of Australia, and I make a jolly decent bid to have my criminal record expunged, and that. It seemed to have worked. We've done it for a decade, for a full decade. We performed, Ilbidgery Theatre performed Jack Charles versus the Crown for a full decade. It must have reached the ears and minds of people in Parliament here in Victoria. Daniel Andrews, for instance, now had, we knew that he was up for expunging criminal records because Ron Merkel, QC bloke, local QC bloke, and Uncle Larry Walsh had spoken to Daniel Andrews about the possibility of expunging our baby criminal records. Because when you were taken...
And you want to expunge these records so that you can go back into prisons and talk to inmates about another way to live.
Develop a business.
Yes.
Go overseas with no problems. But Daniel Andrews expunged our baby criminal records about 2 years ago. And that, so we knew that he was up for a conversation about expunging criminal records.
Great.
And you wouldn't believe it, the previous March before, this March, last March, he'd already put in his own bill and called it the Spent Conviction Scheme. So Victoria now has a Spent Conviction Scheme. We're the first state to undertake this. And that. So my first criminal record was at the age of 4 months. And my offence at 4 months was child in need of care and attention. That is an offence in those days.
Yes.
They've been expunged by Daniel Andrews, and now he's got a spent conviction schemes happening. So my job now, zooming into Malmesbury Youth Training Centre and adult prisons, was to inform those trapped behind bars that there is a light at the end of the tunnel if you care to look for it. You can have your criminal record expunged.
Jack, we have barely scratched the surface of your life, but 45 minutes has whizzed by.
Oh.
I want to take some questions from the audience, and the lovely Cassandra from Brimbank is going to text me some of those questions. And while I'm waiting for them to come through, I might make one final observation of my own, which is, as you approach the end of your 8th decade on Earth, it seems to me you remain as open and alive to life as ever, despite some really difficult trials and tribulations along the way. And obviously when you choose to be open, you're going to take some big hits along the way. But nonetheless, it seems to me, and the message of your book seems to be, staying open and alive to life is the only sane and progressive and hopeful approach to living. It's the most inspiring thing about your book, in fact, your courage and your resilience and your openness. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah, of where you are and where you're going?
Yeah, and it's proof positive, because I love nothing better than when somebody will rush up to me and excitedly tell me, an older person or a younger person, tripping over themselves to inform me that they're off the methadone. I'm off the methadone, Uncle. Thanks very much. I've shown them the way.
Thank you, Jack. I'm just waiting on a text here for some questions. I'll remind you too that if you'd like to win a copy of the memoir Born Again Blackfella by Uncle Jack Charles, just put your name and suburb in the chat function, and the team from Brimbank will select 2 winners at the end.
I'll sign it.
Fantastic. The text hasn't come through, so I'm literally borrowing Cassandra's phone, and I'm going to have to whack my glasses on. And Jack, the first question is from Helena. Were you asked to write your book, or did you do it when you were good and ready? i.e. were you approached by a publisher or did you have a
No,
book?
when I was good and ready,
Yes.
and the publisher just picked it up.
And David asks, what does the written word mean to you? Why is it important for you to put it down in words?
It's much like as much of a legacy that Uncle Bob Mazza and myself have left with theatre, with black theatre. We were the ones that have left an amazing legacy, and words can say a lot. They can move people. My words have made people cry, they've made people laugh, they've made people seriously think about them, they've made people sigh.
Yes.
And that's what you do with words.
Yes.
Very important.
Jennifer Bruss asks, are there any contemporary artists that inspire you, and what is it about them that is inspiring to you?
When I left the Murphys and was out on my own, such a young age, at about 16, I would start to go to Ziegfeld's dance. And so I wanted to be like Jimmy Little, who was the rage at the time. I wanted to be like Harold Blair. I wanted to be like Paul Robeson. There was a number of different people that I wanted to emulate. I didn't want to be Elvis because I didn't think I had the right moves, I didn't have the right colour and that, but Jimmy Little, Paul Robeson.
And you speak fondly of Paul Kelly, the musician
And
in
Paul
the book.
Kelly, well,
Why
once
is he
I got
important
to
to
know who
you?
he was, you know, I was just totally blown away
Yes.
with him, and then his eventual, giving Archie a chop out to each other and that, you know, so I'm totally blown away with him and that, you know, honesty and integrity in every word and all the music that he's produced.
Jack, there's a question here from Shirley. She says, in your book you talk about how much you love reading. Who are some of your favourite writers and what are you reading at the moment?
Nothing at the moment, but Macaire, all the spy books in the old days. I always inevitably had a dilly bag, and there were books in my dilly bag.
And you say in the book that in prison,
Yeah, I read
you
a lot
liked
in
the
prison.
opportunity that gave you to read
Yes.
and even learn languages. German
Well, a
and-
little bit of language, but not much, you know. But I would. I liked the spy stories in the old days. I'd read the odd biographies of different people, but I really liked John le Carre. I liked the early, American writers of the '60s and that. Forget their names now. The Fire Next Time, that fella
Yes.
who wrote that one. I can't remember the names now, but it was black writers
Yes.
that I was fond to read, but I also liked a good spy novel, a good spy movie.
And Jack, there's a gardening question from Leah. Thank you for sharing your story, Uncle Jack. Are you still a green thumb? And can you share any tips for growing chrysanthemums?
No, I'd like to have time to grow a garden, but I'm in a block of units. Some of the old people have got veggie plots at the back, and raised veggie plots and flower plots and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just content to wander the streets and look at other people's gardens and etc. Maybe if I get a humpy of my own, land of my own, I will grow flowers and etc. But at the moment, it's not within my scope.
And Jack, I'm going to combine two questions here because I think they might be related. There's a question from Tegan who asks, how have you managed to stay so positive given the challenges in your life? And there's a question from Jennifer Hocking who says, what role has humour played in your life? I suspect that one of the ways you've managed to stay so positive is through that very keen, mischievous sense of humour that is evident in the book.
Yes,
But how have you managed to stay so positive despite it all?
There's nothing really that brings me down. You know, I do have my detractors, you know, but I like to say to myself, well, hang on, I'm not such a tall poppy. that I should ever be cut down by somebody. I'm only, 2 centimetres short of 5 foot. That fosters within me a bit of a giggle, you know. And, I'm a unique person, I say it myself. You have to be totally up yourself to be Jack Charles, to do what I've done, especially where I've been.
Yes.
And except looking forward, trying to be a key player in the humanities against the odds, and that I have my detractors in the prison system that won't be comfortable allowing me in, because people like me could perhaps stop people from going into prisons, and they need people to go into prisons. Prisons can't function unless people become dedicated recidivists. And so there's the laugh, there's the giggle factor. And of course you have to be totally up yourself in order to be thinking these incredible thoughts. It might impact on others. That's the secret to my being who I am.
Yes.
And why I laugh a lot, and why, my words count.
And there's lots of questions, including from a woman called Jennifer McCaffer, about your role as a mentor, based on your own life and learnings, and the joy you get from helping the next generation, particularly of Indigenous youth. That seems to be a big factor in your satisfaction these days.
Yeah, yes, it's still an attraction for me. I'd like to use my sexy voice to write specific narratives, monologues, to record and to be delivered to the teachers in our youth detention centres, adult prisons even, and get the fellas, the girls and boys, men and women, to perhaps put on the headphones and listen to my voice, taking them back to their first memory of their first ever crime. Can they do that?
Yes.
Are you able to take yourself back to that first criminal action? Don't need to know about it. Just you, yourself.
Yes.
You've got 17 hours locked alone in your cell. If you and your partner, your Sally, can listen to my voice and undertake this measure, I'm trying to instill in you something that's been missing in your life because of drugs. You're starting to behave like white people. If you're Aboriginal, I want these African Australians to take themselves back to their first act of criminality and that. Did they respect their own people, their culture, your family members? Are you missing any elements of family life that you might have enjoyed when you were younger, but now that you're older, 16, 17, you're committing crimes, you're doing jail times for the crimes you've committed. Like you to head it off at the past. My job is to head you off at the past, get you to start thinking about a life, the possibilities of discovering a new direction in your life. But are you game enough to do this?
That's Jack. Jack, there are dozens more questions, but we've run out of time. Maybe I'll end with one last quick one. Any plans to write another book?
Well, yes, I have to now.
About what?
Well, with the information that I've gotten, from the SBS mob, and who do you think you are? I have to correct some of the past information that I've gotten from the Koori Heritage Trust and that, I've been corrected by this mob through my DNA. They found out. I won't disclose any of it because you need to see it. It's going to be a special for NAIDOC Week. And my story, matters because my story is a reflection on so many other stories, white and black. Even African stories are similar to my stories, my life, and etc. So have a Captain Cook, have a good look at who do you think you are, because it'll be a wake-up call for so many. And as I say, my life is a reflection on so many other lives.
Your life is an epic story, and thank you so much for sharing just a small part of it with me and with our audience tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you to our audience for joining us and for all your wonderful questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. Brimbank are going to put in the chat function who has picked up the 2 complimentary copies of Jack Charles's book. Enjoy that. Of course, enjoy the rest of the festival. It runs until June the 26th. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks again for joining us. I'm going to throw back now to a final message from the Mayor. Good night.
I'd also like to thank all of you joining us by this broadcast. It's been wonderful to have your company. In closing, remember to check out the festival program on our website. There is so much more to be enjoyed. Thank you once again, and good night.